Hi everyone! Today I'm going to be talking you through part 3 of my fluffy cat, and we'll be starting to fill out the face. We'll be using a couple of techniques I showed you in parts 1 and 2, including how to use a paper stump and slice tool. So if you haven't watched those videos, you can find links for them in the description below. There's also a full materials list below too, so you can see exactly what I'm using. So coloured pencils at the ready, and let's get drawing. So as we already know, coloured pencils are a slow medium. There's no getting away from it. They are slow. And actually I love that they're slow. It means that I can take my time. It's quite a mindful process, and it's so enjoyable seeing the piece kind of come together and grow in before your eyes. Now I use a number of different techniques for creating fur, particularly soft fur like this, and you can see this very strange contraption that I've got here, and all it is a paper stump with a little blob of putty eraser on the end. I just find that sometimes you can be a little bit more controlled with it, and you can sort of really get the end quite pointy, and not get it, you know, not keep it in your hand all of the time. So I do that occasionally, and it works quite well actually. Now when I'm starting fur like this, the first thing I start to think about, or the first thing when I see a picture like this, the first thing I do is I look at the quality of the fur. You know, we've done the eyes, we've done the ears. They're very different to the very soft, fluffy fur that for the rest of the cat. So having a look at the fur and determining, you know, what quality it is, how would it feel if I was sort of stroking this cat, how would that fur feel underneath my hands? Can I sink my fingers into the fur? What's the density of it? How long is the hair? And those are all the sorts of things that kind of come to mind when I'm looking at a piece like this and deciding on how I'm going to tackle it. With this piece, as we know, I'm using the Pastelmat board. I find the Pastelmat board absolutely brilliant for lighter coloured animals. It just works so well. I can layer, I can get lovely soft subtlety with it, and I mean it has to be my favourite surface, I have to say. Now I'm teaming this on this piece, I'm teaming it with the light fast pencils quite a bit, especially in these first layers. The light fast, the Derwent light fast pencils they're so good for this kind of fur. Especially this colour. So it's a bit of a strange colour. One minute you think it's this, and the next minute you think it's that, and it's like, well, what on earth is this colour? And I've found that using pencils like the Fossil Grey, which is like a very pinky grey, works just brilliantly. And then bringing into that the Oyster and even the Arctic, which is the very pale blue, and then bringing in some of the cold greys in there as well, and some of the more pinky whites. So I tend to start with a very, very soft layer of colour just to get a feel for those undertones, if you like. And I'll kind of work, I tend to work in sections, but I might just sort of work all over that section just to get a real feel for the form of the cat. So you can see here I've done a little bit on the edge. I'm coming over, I'm starting to kind of plot in those shapes in the middle of the cat's eyes there. You know, just to get a real feel for it. But you'll also notice that I've gone in very, very light. Now, I do kind of chop and change my techniques, to be honest. Sometimes I go in really dark. Sometimes I kind of build the darkness up. When I go in really dark, it's usually when something is very, very dark, almost like a black or a very dark blue or very dark red. With this particular cat, I found it a real challenge to actually capture the correct tonal value for these middle areas of the cat. When you look at the cat, it looks very pale, but actually those darker areas in between the eyes and the patterns and coming down over the nose are quite dark, and I found that quite a challenge. So building up to that, I find a much easier thing to do. So starting very light, plotting the colours, getting some of the texture and everything in, I find it much easier then to come in and start to sort of bring you know, more depth and more of that darker tone in there. So to get the really lovely fluffy soft fur, it's definitely around light pressure. So I always use light pressure. I hardly ever use really hard pressure, especially in the beginnings of my pieces. And it's just about getting sort of some of that lovely soft fluffiness in. Pastelmat board is a lot smoother than the actual Pastelmat paper that you get in the pads and the sheets. So I do find that it does work well, and having these softer pencils like the Luminance and the Light Fast going down first, you tend to get, especially the light colours, you do tend to get this lovely softness quite quickly. And then using things like the paper stump and the putty eraser just to help sort of smooth and blend. I never really use erasers to fix things, especially in Pastelmat. I never use it to kind of erase anything. If I make a mistake, I just kind of work it into the layers. I find that Pastelmat is, you know, it's really, really good for that kind of thing. It's very, very forgiving, you know, so you can kind of work everything into your layers. So I tend to use my putty eraser just for creating highlights and keeping those highlights. And you'll see as I start to kind of bring these darker elements into the middle of the cat's face, I keep coming back in with the putty eraser and lifting out those sort of lighter areas. That's really, really important for me to keep those, you know, those lighter areas sort of relatively clean. And it means that I can build those areas up. I can still get a little bit of pigment in there, but, you know, I've got all of that shaping and everything right from the beginning, and it's much easier then to kind of build around it. So choosing your colours, I've sort of mentioned a few colours, and the fossil grey really was something that I used an awful lot on this cat. I've also brought in some Pablos. You can see I'm using I think it's the brownish beige that I'm using here. Another really great colour for this sort of, it's quite an odd coloured cat. You know, and it's very rare that you're going to get a colour of pencil that will actually match the actual colour of what it is that you're trying to draw. So sort of teaming those colours together, bringing in a few different colours to get that that exact match on the cat. That's kind of what I do. I don't try and search for just one pencil that's going to you know, to match the colour. And it could be that I start with a couple of colours right at the beginning, and then I swap halfway through and find something that's a little bit better. Goodness knows what's happening here with the picture going all over the place. Oh, I'll just mention this little eraser here as well. That's the I think it's the Faber Castell, or is it the Derwent? Oh, I think it's the Derwent precision eraser. It's like an eraser on the end of a pencil, and it's again another little tool that I think I'm throwing everything at this one. I think I was getting a bit, oh my goodness, this fur's just, you know, getting the better of me, so I think I was throwing every single tool I had at it. Those pencils with a little bit of a brush on the end are pretty good, although I would say be very, very, very careful about using a brush on Pastelmat. Goodness knows what I was thinking there, but it's you can just brush your pigment straight off the surface, so I wouldn't recommend using a brush at all. But yes, back to the colours. Building your colours gently. So I tend to look for the lightest colour I can see in an animal, and I will start off with that colour, and then I will build the other colours onto it, so you end up with the darker colours on the top. It's definitely the opposite of pastels. Whereas you tend to start with the darker elements and then work up to the lighter. With coloured pencil, it is much harder to do that. You can do it on the Pastelmat, it does work, and it does work really nicely, but it's easier to do it light to dark. And actually my brain works better light to dark. I tend to see those lighter colours first and then build the darker ones in on the top. But the other thing as well that's brilliant with coloured pencil is that you can add colours in as you go. So, you know, you might decide when you finish the piece that you want to add a little bit more colour, and you just sort of glaze that in over the top, which is great. I've used the slice tool quite a bit in this piece as well. Now you have to be, I think I mentioned it before, you do have to be careful with your slice tool. Your slice tool is a brilliant tool, as every other art tool that we use, erasers, all of that sort of thing. But it is not a replacement for good quality rendering and pencil strokes. So if you're finding you're using your slice tool to create all of your fur strokes, I would suggest that you kind of look at your I go back to basics a little bit, to be honest. You know, your slice tool is there to enable you to sort of, well, you can do what you want with it, can't you? You can do what you want with it. If you want to use it for your fur strokes, that's fine. I tend to find that you get more realistic fur if you use your pencils and then bring the slice tool in just to sort of, you know, touch up bits and tweak bits. You know, it's a brilliant tool. It's so useful, and it works very, very nicely on the Pastelmat as well. I tend to use it on its edge, so it sort of scrapes the pigment away rather than it cut the pigment, if you see what I mean. So always use it on its edge a little bit. And then as you build these colours, going from the lighter ones through to the dark, you start to really see some of the form of the animal that you're drawing, you know, and this is what you're really wanting. And this is kind of a stage, I think, as you're growing and you're developing as a coloured pencil artist, there are definitely certain stages that you go through, and some people go through them quicker than others. You get to a stage where you start to see these little tiny nuances in the fur. These very, very small tonal changes that you might kind of see as detail. I see more as tonal changes, and these tiny little changes are what are going to make a massive difference to your work, because what they do is they really start to suggest what's going on under the fur. I find cats particularly hard because you can't really see the bone structure under all of that fluff. You know, whereas with a dog or a horse, you tend to be able to see what's going on underneath the fur, and it's much easier then to sort of recognise like a cheekbone or something like that. With cats, they tend to have this very dense fur, and it just sort of sits on the face, and it's like a puffball. You know, so, but they still have these very subtle tonal changes which are going to make your pieces look really, really, really realistic. So I would be, if you're just beginning, you may not see these. You know, if you're kind of developing your work and you're getting to a point where you're wanting to add more detail in, then really, really look for those subtle changes, because they are what are going to take your work to the next level. Now, one of the things that can happen when you are just starting out with coloured pencil, actually, when you're watching things like this and you're watching other artists build their pieces and you look at their techniques, is very often to sort of be watching it and then think, hang on a second, you've just put loads of detail in there, and now you're either rubbing it out or you're blending it with another pencil over the top and losing it all. And it can kind of seem a little bit counterproductive. And I must admit, I have had some remarks on some of my tutorials where it's like, this seems really, it seems like it's almost like a waste of time what you're doing. You know, you're sort of putting all of this layer down, and then you're either rubbing it out or you're, you know, smoothing it and getting rid of what you've done. Now, you will find that a lot of coloured pencil artists will do the same. They'll kind of start with a base layer, get that either a smooth layer of colour in, or I tend to try to bring in sort of some texture right from the beginning. It just helps me. And then we'll either kind of use the eraser to sort of dab out some of the highlighty bits. I tend to do that a lot using sort of like a subtraction technique. Or you'll find that, you know, we put quite a lot of detail in and then go over the top and sort of smooth it out. Now, it's all part and parcel of the layering process. With coloured pencil, because it takes so long, and you can't get the sort of the softness and everything down, you know, in one layer, you kind of have to build it up, and you have to build all of those little elements into it right from the beginning. But sometimes it can go down too strong and you need to soften it a little bit. Sometimes you kind of put the pencil in and then you need to kind of lighten areas. Like I was saying about those little tonal changes, you know, you can just bring in a little tiny bit of an eraser just to create a tiny subtle highlight that you might not see right from the beginning, but that is there and that will make a massive difference. So you can see with this piece here, you know, I'm starting to go in a little bit darker, but then we come back in again with the paper stump and we start to smooth it out. I start to take little bits out with the putty eraser, and it is almost like the hokey cokey. You know, you're putting the pigment in, you're taking it out, you know, but it all is kind of a part of the master plan, basically, you know, and it's like building the fur from the inside out, and you've got to try and create that lovely, soft, fluffy feel. And it does take, you know, quite a while. It does take a few layers to be able to get that feeling. You know, we talk about the ugly stage in drawing. You know, and especially with Pastelmat, when you start to put these colours down, and it can look really grainy. When you first start to use Pastelmat, it's like, oh my goodness, what have I done? You know, especially if you've come from a smooth paper, it's like, wow, what have I done? But once you get to grips with it and you understand how it works, and using the you know, sort of like smoothing techniques, blending the pencil out with Pastelmat is fantastic, because the pigment just sits kind of on the top of the paper, so you can move it around. Then you start to really love what you can actually achieve with it, you know. And then building that pencil back up again, building the pencil strokes back up again, creates this beautiful depth. And you've got this fabulous base underneath, you know, and that's how you're going to get this really realistic, lovely, soft, fluffy fur, is just by taking it slowly, building the layers, you know, and understanding that sometimes it looks a little bit ugly, but that Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, you cannot create soft, fluffy fur with one layer. You know, you can't do it unless you're doing a sketch or something like that. You know, but with coloured pencil, it was going to take a few layers, and I think understanding that process goes a long way to feeling happy about your pieces. You know, a lot of people will come to me and say, oh, I'm really not happy with how this is going, you know, please help, I'm about to stop. And I'm like, well, you're only like a quarter of the way through. You know, you've got so much more to do on it. This is sort of like the ugly stage. You just got to keep going. I try to keep things looking quite pretty, I have to say, and that's for my own benefit rather than anything else. So I'll try to make, and I think this is why I work in sections, I try to make something look as realistic as possible right from the outset, because that then helps me to feel motivated to carry on. You know, I do understand that if you go through quite a lengthy ugly stage, it can be really frustrating. So, you know, I try to keep everything that I do and use techniques that are going to enable me to make it look quite realistic right from the offset. So yeah, you know, use your different colours, use your light colours over the top of the dark colours, especially on Pastelmat, to help smooth and blend. You know, if you put a dark colour in, it will tend to go a little bit grainy, so then counteracting that with a lighter colour over the top is going to really help that blending and softness. And just work up from the outside in. Use your tools that are there to help you. When you're using the paper stump, don't use it too hard. Use it very softly. If you use a paper stump too hard, with too hard a pressure on Pastelmat, what happens is you push that pigment into the tooth, and the tooth actually comes back out at you, and it can end up being really grainy, and it's impossible to get rid of. So just use your tools very lightly and very subtly, you know, and it's going to be amazing. So yeah. Hi everyone, thanks for watching this video, and I really hope you found it useful and have learnt something new. If you have any questions or queries, please feel free to leave me a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button below, and if you'd like to find more tutorials filmed in real time with loads of detail and full step-by-step instructions, you can join my Patreon for just £5 a month. You can find a link for this in the description below. Hope to see you again soon.